Welcome to this video about graphic equalizers. So in this video I explain you what is a graphic EQ and what could you use it for. So we don't really use a graphic EQ to really change how an instrument sounds or to EQ a microphone or a vocal or whatever. We don't really use a graphic EQ before. Just let me refresh quickly your mind what a graphic EQ is. So in a parametric EQ, you have 4 different frequencies you can pick, and you can either raise or lower the gain of these frequencies. Whereas in a graphic EQ, you have 32 frequencies, but you cannot pick them, they're fixed. And you cannot also not choose the bandwidth, that's also fixed. You can just decide to either turn them up or down. So the big advantage here, we have 32 bands. The disadvantage is we cannot decide which frequency it is, and we can also not decide like the bandwidth, how many surrounding frequencies we want to raise or lower. So where do we now actually use graphic EQs? There is 2 ways we can use them. First one is as an insert in the sum of a speaker or monitor. So basically at the left-right processing or at the group processing, like right before we send the signal to a speaker, that's a place where we normally put the graphic EQ, or as I now also already quickly mentioned, in groups. So there is this concept of groups in many mixing consoles, and it would be a good reason sometimes to add a graphic EQ to a group to process the signal in the group. But what is actually the goal with that graphic EQ? As I mentioned before, we don't want to change really how the signal sounds. We don't really want to do like classical EQing, how we do it with the parametric EQ. Actually, the reason I normally use a graphic EQ for is to eliminate feedback frequencies. So there's for microphones, there is often certain frequencies in the room which are prone to feedback. And what we can achieve with a graphic EQ is we can move down or turn down the volume of a certain frequency a little bit, so that this frequency is not as strong anymore as before, and in this way we don't end up with these feedbacks in the room. So that's basically one application I use graphic EQs for, and that's also the application I want to explain to you how you can use the graphic EQs to achieve this. Our final goal with this is to really not change how the instrument or how the microphone sounds. We want to keep the sound actually as almost the same. We don't want to change the sound at all. So this is why a graphic EQ is pretty handy here, because it got 32 different frequencies, and we always just turn down one frequency band of these 32 frequencies, so we don't change the sound of the signal a lot. So now how to apply a graphic EQ. You have to make sure you do the graphic EQing before you do the sound check, and if possible no one should be in the room. So normally you do the setup of the PA, you do the setup on stage, and then before you start the sound check, the room should be empty, and then you can basically set the graphic EQ. Why should there be no one in the room? Because the room has to be completely quiet. We have to basically now find out which frequencies are the frequencies which will cause feedback later on. So you can follow my 7-step process to achieve this. Step number 1 is you put the main fader to neutral position, so to unity position. This is the master fader. And then you take the microphone and you put it onto a microphone stand. And make sure the microphone is approximately at the position where the singer, the vocal, also will be during the performance, because we want to simulate the situation, how it will be during the event. So put the microphone on stand, switch it on, so that it is approximately where the vocal will be, where the person will be singing. Number 3, switch on microphone, yeah, I said it already, and unmute it on the console. And then number 4, start to lift the channel fader of the microphone. And now, it's actually quiet in the room, but you lift the channel fader until you hear a feedback frequency. And at some point, this will most likely happen. So make sure you have either an RTA or an app on your phone which is measuring the feedback frequency. So you will lift it, and at some point, a certain frequency will start to feedback and basically go out of the speakers. So try to measure which frequency this is, and then of course, yeah, as soon as you saw which frequency it was, lower the frequency of the feedback a little in the graphic EQ. So what you basically do here is you hear the frequency which is which is feedbacking, and then in the graphic EQ you pull down that frequency a little bit. So we eliminate or we turn down that frequency a little bit so that it doesn't feedback too fast. So if the feedback is gone, you can again push the fader a little bit further up. So you push it a little bit further up until you hear again a feedback frequency. It might be the same still, so you turn that graphic EQ frequency even more down, or it could now be a different frequency. So you again measure which frequency is it, and you turn it down on the graphic EQ. So you actually repeat this process several times. I normally do like 4 or 5 different frequencies, and at some point, like several frequencies will start to feedback. And if there is more than, let's say, 2 or 3 frequencies feedbacking at the same time, you cannot basically optimize the graphic EQ a lot more. You would just have basically feedback at many points, so it would change. It would not benefit the sound anymore. So at this point, you can stop the process and leave the graphic EQ as is. So that's how I normally use graphic EQs. It helps me a lot to make sure I don't have feedback, and this is also often the main reason I use group processing in mixing consoles. I often make a vocal group, so before sending the vocal microphones to the left-right processing, I send them through a group, and in that group I apply a graphic EQ, and in that group then I pull out the frequencies which I get feedback from, and then I send the graphic EQ signal to the left-right processing and then to the speaker. So in this way I only the microphone signals are affected and not the signals of the instruments. That's it. Thanks for watching.